What's up everyone, this is Frank from Fam Sports New York, and for this video we are going to be doing our team previews for Section 1A. The season is right upon us. We have people playing games in week 0, which is like a day from now when you're probably watching this. I want to welcome our audience in. If you're new here for this video, we're going to be giving a brief overview of all the teams in Section 1A, talking about kind of their overlook, some players to look out for. I've reached out to a bunch of coaches, whether it's exchanging messages or speaking over the phone. I haven't gotten to everybody, unfortunately, but we're going to be giving a nice overview of the different programs, returning players, my thoughts on each of them. And just going to give a couple disclosures here. The first one is, if I don't mention you, because we're pressed for time, if I don't mention you on the team preview, it doesn't mean I don't think that you're a good player or that you can't have a strong season, but I have to limit down on who I can talk about. And I know sometimes I could be viewed as being blunt or harsh at times, but just know that, I've been a coach, I've played football. I understand the difficulty it is to build up a program, to win at a high level. So there's a mutual respect, but I'm also going to be honest and tell it like I see it. And so I do think the big thing for me is being fair, and that's something I push for. The second thing, there isn't going to be a week 0 preview show. Our in-season coverage starts week 1. So I know there are some games going on in week 0, including some league game in Class A. So I will not be previewing them, but I am going to be talking about the teams. So let's kind of dive right into this stuff. And obviously give a thumbs up and subscribe if you like this content. Think about joining our Patreon. The support really is appreciative. Let's start speaking about Class A overall. There's 12 teams in the class. There's a League A and a League B, and let's start in League A, and let's start with Somers. Somers coached by Anthony DiMatteo, and Somers last year 13-0. They won the section and the state championship. That week 0 they're going to Ramapo, New Jersey Ramapo, and no matter what happens at that game, I gotta give Somers credit. Playing some big dogs here. It takes some cojones is what I'll say, but they have been on a tear. Usually when you have a legendary coach that leaves, there's a lot of uncertainty with where the program direction is going to go. But Somers has not just met that over these last couple of years. They've exceeded that. They've gone to 2 straight state title games, winning 1. Their record over the last 3 years is 31-1. I mean, it's been absolutely crazy. I think it's 7 straight years of winning 6 or more games. They've been on a crazy tear. Number 1 win percentage over the last 5 years in A. When you look at this team, though, they did lose a lot. Offensively, 3 out of 11 starters coming back, 2 of them on the offensive line, but you lose a guy like Polito, which is very hard to replace. The quarterback also being replaced, and we'll talk about him. Sullivan kind of moving positions to fill that role. Defensively, also similar. 3 out of 11 starters coming. And obviously, the big question mark is these serious roles to fill. Now, the good thing is, these are some talented young men. They've had a strong JV program as well. And sometimes their biggest downfall is the kid in front of them is just more talented. Now it's their turn, right? So they're looking to fill in a bunch of roles. And I do think that this team is talented. I think this team can compete again. I think the strength is really going to come in the trenches. And that's what has been a strength for them for a long time. And some of the players to watch, let's start with the quarterback, Max Sullivan, the senior. Show man at 6'4", 205 pounds. Coach really raved about him that, they're looking to run the quarterback a little bit more. This is someone who's got a big arm. He's very athletic. He probably could have been a Frank's finest wide receiver, but he's moving to that quarterback spot. And he's going to be key to this team and this offense because, again, they have to replace a very talented and effective quarterback for a couple years, and now Max steps in. And they talked about trying to utilize him in different ways. So that's definitely to keep an eye on. But I mentioned the trenches, right? And 2 guys to really keep an eye on. Ryan Cole, we know about. Dominant football player, especially on that defensive side of the ball. He was a Frank's finest. He's explosive, very disruptive. Can play the run and the pass. Nick Kreco is another one on that offensive line. Very sturdy force, but also on defense, going to also be important. So those 2 guys are really going to have to man the trenches, but they're not alone. I'm looking at a guy like Matt Klee is another one you can add into that arsenal that in the trenches is where Somers, I think, can They had the athletes, but what is going to separate them from trying to repeat again is in the trenches. Matt Clee's another one, 6 feet, 230 pounds. But there's some young guys, right? Ben Harris is someone named keep up, another big boy at 6'2", 220 pounds, the junior. Giuseppe Joffrey, who got some playing time last year on the O-line, D-line at 6'1", 195. And then looking at some of those skill guys, right? I mentioned the quarterback, but Mason Kelly is someone to really keep an eye on for me because I think he could really pop off this year. He was a running back, came in as part-time. He was a Frank's finest, and as a strong safety. He's going to be such an important two-way player, the junior. Dean Palazzolo is another one coach brought up to keep an eye on. This is a young player, sophomore. Miguel Iglesias is another one, right? So he's a guy who's the backup quarterback, but he also plays wide receiver, defensive back, and he's also a very, very good athlete. To me, Somers, I mentioned in the trenches, also in the secondary. Valencia, Violante, these are another couple guys who made plays for them and got playing time last year. So that's kind of the Somers outlook. And I think, again, this is another very competitive and I think a talented team. Just going to be new names that are going to be kind of coming onto the scene that you might have not known before. Let's go to the next team, and that's Mahopac. Last year, they went 5-4. They lost in the first round of the playoffs to Harrison. To me, there's a good and bad, right, with Mahopac. At sometimes it feels like a mixed bag. Over the last 5 years, 21-21. I think that puts them 9th out of the 12 A teams in win percentage over that time span. But the good thing, last 2 years, they made the playoffs, right? Last year, they lost in the first round. The year prior, they did get a win in the playoffs and lost to Rye in the semis. So again, it's, which direction we're going here. And in week 0, they go to play Goshen, at Goshen. But talking about kind of the players they have to replace and the players coming back, they're replacing a lot of production here at the running back spot in Joey Koch. And it's not easy to replace a guy like Joey Koch. He was putting up numbers that we haven't seen since, 2009, 2010, with guys like Justin Altera. So, again, we're talking about somebody who put up monster numbers and I think really helped carry this offense. I'm sprinkled in with some other skill guys, but Joey Koch is difficult to replace, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And also on the offensive line, I think they're going to be very young. They're replacing a bunch of offensive linemen. Now, granted, Mapac's one of the bigger schools in A, so I do think they'll still have some size there, but there will be inexperience. But I do think the strength is the skill position. They're bringing back their quarterback, bringing up their backup quarterback. They're bringing back, again, a bunch of skill guys. So I think the skill position is going to be a strength for them. And a couple players to watch. The first one, obviously the big one that comes to mind, is Danny Koch, who's going to be playing running back. I imagine they sprinkle him as wide receiver. Just get him the ball in many different ways as you can. And also as a safety, he's a very strong two-way player for them. And I've talked to him previously in the Frank's Finest. He really made some big plays as a very good compliment to his brother. So interested to see how this is a young man, 6 feet, 180 pounds. John Carney is another one as a skill position. Got hurt at the end of last year, but he's another talented skill guy who can also make plays. The skill position, I don't think, will be an issue here. On the defensive side of the ball, someone who did pop off on tape to me was Owen Ryan. He stepped in at the linebacker role. He made some big plays. I think he had that game-sealing INT versus John Jay Cross River, if I recall correctly. And he was someone who I thought stepped in and made some plays on the defensive side. But I'm interested to see what Mahopac, for me, again, the field is shrunken, right? There's some teams that went down. They got 12 teams in A. I do think Mahopac can and should be competitive in this league. I don't think there should be any reasons why they aren't. Let's move to the next team in Class A, in League A. And let's talk about Yorktown. Yorktown last year, they went 5-4, no playoffs. They had that really brutal loss to Brewster, which kind of knocked them out of the playoff race. And I tell you what, they've been pretty consistent. We know about Yorktown. They have a long history of winning. Last 5 years, 25-17. Week 0, they're playing at Poly Prep, which is on a Thursday, which is just crazy. I don't know how teams are playing games on a Thursday already. But they're returning a bunch of players. Offensively, 7 out of 11 starters coming back. Defensively, 8 out of 11 starters coming back. On the offensive side, 3 offensive linemen and their quarterback. So they're bringing back some experience here. I mean, the big question mark to me is, yes, you're bringing back a lot of guys who have a lot of experience, who made some plays for you, but you also lost some big guns. Myrelis has a lot of production as well. I mentioned APAC on the previous one with Koch. Myrelis had a lot of production for this offense. How do you replace that? And even on the offensive line, Broussage was a big-time player for them up front. You know, there's some big shoes to fill. But the biggest strength to me on Yorktown, and speaking to Coach, he wanted to be more detailed offensively. They know that they have the experience, but they want to be more detailed, oriented, especially on the offensive line. That was kind of a big thing he emphasized. Defensively, listen, I think this unit could be very fast. Now, how big they are, I'm not sure, but they got some speed to them, and we know their aggressive style, so they can generate a lot of negative plays. To me, I think Yorktown is probably a team not talked about enough as a contender in A. And, you know, I'll make maybe some bold predictions off camera on social media, but I do think Yorktown is probably one of the top competitors in A next to Somers. And so some of the players to watch, you know, maybe I've been burnt before, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that some of the players to watch, how about their quarterback, Caden Gonzalez, the junior, another year in the system. The coaches really like his calm, cool collectiveness about him. And he really did have some bright moments last year on tape. And then it had some ugly moments, right? But that's part of being a young quarterback, is going through those growing pains. So I'm interested to see how he grows this next year. A couple of the offensive linemen I think are going to be so important. Jake Wilson, the senior big man at 6'3", 300 pounds. Adrian Hassaj, the senior guard. These are two guys who are going to have to lead the way on that offensive front. And for them to compete for likes like Somers, you need to be able to hold up in the trenches on the offensive and defensive line. So to me, that's going to be extremely important. And they have a bunch of skill guys, right? Talk about Dylan Delvecchio at the running back spot to help try to fill the role of Myrelis. Chris Constantine is another guy at the running back, wide receiver spot, and defensive back. Coaches have raved about his work this offseason. Thomas Costello is a Frank's finest at the wide receiver spot and plays that linebacker role. Justin Price has been a multi-year player on the varsity, and he's a guy who plays DB and wide receiver, so you can see a trend coming here, right? Ryan Vogel was a Frank's finest linebacker, very fast, very explosive in this stunting style defense, so you know they want to use him. He plays well in space. Andrew Weissman had a strong back half of the year at the free safety spot. Connor Duncan at the linebacker spot. You can see a lot of these kids have had experience. Jack Ferrone, and finally Ryan Kane at defensive end and as a wide receiver / tight end. They have a lot of skill guys. I mean, Yorktown should have high expectations this year, in my opinion. I think they should be striving to be one of the top teams in A, and I think they have the talent to do so. Let's go to the next team, and this is kind of my underrated team of A, team that could be shocking some people, and that's Fox Lane. And when I look at Fox Lane, last year was a struggle, right? They went 1-8 last year. The year prior, they went 5-4. And they are returning a boatload of players with experience. Offensively, 10 out of 11 starters are coming back. And on that offensive line, 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen, including their quarterback, also coming back, who was a young player last year. So, again, a lot of experience on the offense, and on the defense, a little bit less, 7 out of the 11, but still a good chunk of players coming back. And when I spoke to Coach, the biggest question mark for this unit is consistency. You bring in all this experience back, how consistent are they going to strive to reach that next level? That's going to be the big one. And defensively, creating more turnovers. The turnovers is the game. And that's what Coach really, defensively, they want to create more turnovers. Offensively, they had too many turnovers. So it's winning the turnover battle was a big emphasis on when I spoke to him. And I tell you what, I like some of these players coming back for Fox Lane. This could be a unit that surprises a bunch of people in A. They're not being talked about very much at all. But some of these players I'm about to mention, don't be surprised by the time playoff comes around. Fox Lane is going to be one of those teams in the playoffs. I'm making that prediction right now. So, yeah, you know what? Hold me to it. But that's kind of one of my bold takes that's going on. And the players, you know, when I talk about players to watch for Fox Lane, Brian Bailey is the first one that jumps off to me on the offensive line and defensive line. 4-year varsity starter. You don't get a lot of kids at the varsity level these days that are playing 4 years, and he is that strong, disruptive player and a huge part at the center spot. James Minotti, the senior, also another reliable outside linebacker, and defensively and offensively can do a little bit of different things for you as a receiver. He can block for you. It's kind of in that H-back role. So very important player. Angel Mejia on the offensive line. He was in contention for Frank's finest on the offensive line. Very big man right here. Can move bodies. Coach is telling me that he's working on his feet, working on his athleticism. So again, if you can make that jump, another big boost on that offensive line. I mentioned bringing back multiple guys. Max Travis is kind of the speedster for this team. He's a guy to keep an eye on, the senior. When I talk about their quarterback, John Cernick, the junior, a lot of growing pains last year, but again, if he can limit turnovers, let him see the growth from his sophomore to junior year, I think could be a big one. And he's going to be another important player. Playing all these very aggressive style defense, you have to have the ability to, again, control the football, not turn the ball over, and make the necessary plays you need to. Declan Connors is another one, a running back and safety. He's a junior. Coach Tuttle, I really like the work that he put in as well. He told me that's somebody you should keep an eye on. I'm excited to see, again, some of these young guys, a bunch of these are juniors now, right? Declan Connors, you got Cam Bahari, the tight end and defensive end. Coach brought up Logan Mamola, and then finally Will Rudolph. So you're seeing a bunch of these, a mixture of different players. Fox Lane is pretty excited. And I would be too with the amount of returning experience that they have. That's Fox Lane. Let's go to the next team, which is Brewster. And Brewster last year, they went 4-5. They ended the regular season on a 3-game win streak, which after a slow start, which got them into the playoffs, including that huge win against Yorktown, where they lost to Somers in the quarters. The year prior, they were 5-4. Last 5 years, 22-20. Right, Brewster has been a pretty consistent team. Hovering just above that 500 mark. Week 0, they're playing a league game, right? So they're playing a league game at John Jay Cross River. So we're already getting into league play week 0. Not sure how that happened, but again, really interesting. Definitely going to have my eye on that one. Offensively, they do have to replace a lot of players. 3 out of 11 starters are coming back. On the offensive line is the big hit, right? Only 1 out of 5 offensive line starters are back. They do also have to replace their quarterback in Perello, who was a very, very big-time player. They had 2 quarterbacks when I spoke to Coach that are competing for that starting role, in Kevin Fox and KJ Dillon. Defensively, they do bring back some more experience. 5 out of 11 starters are coming back. The biggest question mark is obviously the quarterback spot, right? They need to establish the quarterback spot. They need to limit the turnovers, and they really want to focus in on the running game. And they have a talented back who they could try to do that with, but that offensive line also has to be shored up. Now, defensively, limiting the big plays is going to be huge. But overall on this team, when I look at it, again, you lose your top quarterback, you lose your top running back, you lose your top 2 wide receivers. Defense is probably going to have to carry it in the beginning until they establish themselves offensively. Going on players to watch for Brewster, Derek Carlson is obviously the first one at defensive end and offensive lineman. He's a Frank's finest. I've talked about him on previous videos before. Muhammad Bari, the running back, and this is a speedster for them. It has good size, 6 feet, 170 pounds, but this is a guy who can make some big chunk plays for them, and that's in that running game I'm sure they're going to be trying to rely on. We have a kicker, Kevin Perez, that Coach really did mention that he could have a strong leg and be an X factor for them this upcoming season. Colin Lamaro, the linebacker, and also plays tight end, to me is someone who's also very interesting. At 5'10", 180 pounds, he was an active player for them last year, and he's going to have to be another key guy to defensively if they're going to try to control things defensively. He's going to be a big part of it, right? You mentioned a D lineman, now we got a linebacker, and then hopefully we can get somebody in the secondary. And then my eyes are on these quarterbacks, right? Kevin Fox, the senior, KJ Dillon, the sophomore. Interested to see how the quarterback battle has gone. Obviously I don't have inside information there, but again, interested to see how the quarterback position shapes up for Brewster. And this is another, Brewster is always a team that is lingering there. Sometimes they have a down year, sometimes they have an up year. I'm interested to see what comes of Brewster, but that's my kind of overview of Brewster there. Let's move on to the next team, John Jay Cross River. Coached by Joe Candarelli, and boy, he has a lot of passion when you speak to him. Always enjoy speaking to Coach. Last year, they went 4-5. Again, it was a mixed bag at times during the season, but they found a way to get into the playoffs with a huge win, especially against Eastchester in the regular season, and then they pulled off a huge upset in the first round, beating Clarkstown South impressively, and then they lost in the semifinals to Rye. And obviously, Cross River, they know a lot about winning. It's trying to find that consistency to win at a high level, which they've done for a long period of time. Last 5 years, 33-12, and since 2009 all the way up to last year, 81-28, right? So, this is this is a team that knows how to win, but they're also replacing a lot of firepower, and trying to find that consistency year in and year out is a difficult thing to do. Trying to cross river is not a huge school, right? But offensively, they're only bringing back 2 out of 11 starters. On the offensive line, only 1 out of 5. And the quarterback they have to replace, right? You got to replace guys like Shapiro and Galea. This is a lot of firepower and some stud wide receivers that they had. So this is going to be uphill grind. Now, a big one is obviously Tommy Machado is a guy at the quarterback spot. I'll talk to him on players to watch. Defensively, 3 out of 11 starters are coming back. Big question mark is the inexperience. On the offensively, I know Coach kind of pushed when I spoke to him about finishing games. Sometimes it felt like last year they were very explosive, put up a lot of points, but at times it left things out on the table, right? And they lost a lot of close games. Defensively, a big focus on simplifying things a little bit more. They need to see kids step up. And for me, a lot of talent that has to be replaced. You're going to see a lot of unknown commodities. Some returning guys are going to have to really step up, and unknown commodities are going to have to fill in huge roles for this team. That's kind of my take on them. And players to watch. Quarterback Tommy Machado was the first one. The coach brought up the junior. They really love the work that he's put in this offseason. They feel he's a very strong leader for his team. That's going to obviously be a big one. And a couple of the returning guys. Cam Worrell, first one at the linebacker, running back spot. Really important two-way player. His role is going to be increased on the offensive side of the ball, so he's really going to have to help carry the load on both sides. Luka Duva, that outside linebacker and running back as well. He's another guy added to that, made plays on the team last year. Kind of a few of the young guys amongst a sea of seniors that was making plays for them, and he's going to have an increased role as well. Another guy that Coach really raved about, didn't get to play, Jack Macrolisi, the senior. He was hurt last year. Very excited about this young man at the wide receiver position. Could be the big play guy and the reliable target that they're looking for in their offense that really devolves around a lot of speed. Nick Russo's another one. Tall kid, good size kid that Coach brought up. And then a couple transfers, right? So you got your defensive back, James Arfige, Frank's finest. Really had a strong year as a safety last year at Kennedy Catholic. He's going to be super important trying to defend some of these spread offenses and some of the top wide receivers. He's a 5'11", 175-pound kid. And their kicker, Abel Berganza, the senior. Again, kickers are so vital. Kickers and punters who can really put other teams in a bad position, can really help your defense out and help score points when drives stall. And a young guy to keep in mind, Patrick Ryan, the sophomore JV kid, but they are super excited about him. All right, guys, that was one league. We're going to go till now League B. And I know I'm kind of speaking a little bit fast. There's a lot to go through, so I appreciate you guys obviously tuning in. At League B, let's start with Clarkstown South. Coached by Coach Mike Scarpelli. Last year, 7-2. They did lose in the first round to John Jay Cross River. Probably felt a little bit disappointed. They had such a strong year. Probably didn't end the way they want, but they have been a very consistent program. Last 5 years, 32-11. But they have to replace a lot of guys. On the offensive side of the ball, 3 of 11 starters are coming back. They have to replace their quarterback and Michael Holder, who had a really great career and tremendous year last year, but his brother's stepping in, so the Holders are still in charge of the quarterback spot. Defensively, 3 of 11 starters also coming back, so a lot of guys that you have to replace. They had 34 seniors graduate. He lost a lot of starters. Offensively, Coach talked about, which I didn't get to speak to, but I was reading that they want to get more balanced. So that's going to be a big key factor for them offensively. They were more of a pass team last year. This year, expect to see more balance. But I tell you what, you lose 34 seniors, you also have 63 kids on the varsity roster, right? So Clarkstown South football is alive and well. They've been a very consistent program, so they have a lot of bodies. So can they get those guys to step up and fill in these important roles? They do have a lot of inexperience. I do think the linebacker spot is going to be particularly strong on the defensive side of the ball for this group. Big question for me is on the offensive line, right? Players to watch, to me, it starts with Kevin Butler, the linebacker and running back. He's a Frank's finest. He's going to be such an important, pivotal two-way player for them as both the tailback and the linebacker spot. Carson Crisp is another one, outside linebacker and also kind of a scat back. He's a young man in solid size at 6 feet. He's 160 pounds, a little bit lighter, but another linebacker, I think, in a core that is pretty strong, and he's going to be an important player on both sides of the ball. And then I talk about Colin Holder. Has huge shoes to fill, but, he got some reps towards the end of last season. He also, got to watch, and they talked about that, I know, in the article, Lohud. And he's ready to take that mantle. I'm excited to see someone who can use his feet, use his arms. He's someone you can keep an eye on. It might be another spark plug for this offense to kind of carry was similar to what they did last year. On that offensive line where I mentioned is a big question, offensive and defensive line, William Samprelli is the young man who is coming back, who has experience up front. He's going to have to help lead this unit for Clarkstown South to get back to where it knows it wants to be, which is competing for a section title. Jacob Teetle, the junior, is another young guy to keep filling that role. He's playing tight end and safety, solid size at 6'2", 190 pounds. That offensive line and defensive line with guys like Angel Abreu, Jason Artizone. These are juniors that are going to have to, again, step up and fill some roles. I'm excited to see what they bring. Denzel Insman is another really solid-sized kid. Wide receiver and cornerback at 6'1", 180 pounds. You also have Kyle Sparing, the junior, also playing at that linebacker spot. Could also play some wide receiver as well. Also solid size. Clarkstown South has kind of been one of the most consistent programs over these last 5+ years. And so I know a lot of people thinking Clarkstown South might take a big step back from all the seniors that they lost, but I would hold my horses there with that kind of sentiment. Clarkstown South, I do think, is also going to be pretty competitive. It's similar to what Somers, when you lose all this talent, those next group of guys could really step up. They just probably were shielded by an older, also talented player in front of them, right? So a big opportunity here for Clarkstown South. The next team I want to talk about is coming back into Section 1 from the Independent League, the Hudson Valley Football League, and that's Horace Greeley, coached by Coach Joe Kearns. Back in Section 1 last year, where they were 7-2, they lost to Spring Valley in the semifinals for the Hudson Valley Football League playoffs. They've done a lot of winning the last 2 years. And, I saw some of the quotes from Media Day from Horace Greeley. And 4 years ago, he talked about how, the coach talked about how there was only 40 kids in the entire program. And the last 2 years, they went 14-3. Now they have 70 kids, right? So the big thing, what can you take away with this, right? Being competitive or winning does help, right? And so, they're back into Section 1. I do think some programs should consider doing things like Horace Greeley did, set goals for yourself, right, and evaluate yourself and make good decisions, even though it might not be the most ideal thing, right? So to me, you ended up making the right decision, and now let's see, can they compete in Class A, in which I think the size and physicality is going to get revved up. Offensively, they are bringing back some guys, right? 5 out of 11 starters, 2 on the offensive line. They're bringing back their quarterback, which I'll talk about in a bit. Defensively, 5 out of 11 starters are coming back. The biggest question mark is going to be on the offensive side. Can they run the ball better, right? That was a big focus that coach mentioned. Running the ball better and defensively, tackling better and taking better angles to the football. You're really going to have to swarm in Class A, especially if you're not a very large team, right? You got to use your athleticism. You got to use your speed. To me, they bring back a couple starters on the offensive line that has some good size to them, but to compete in this league, right, to compete in Class A, you have to be able to compete in the trenches. And so that to me is the big question mark when I look at Greeley, because I do think skill-wise, I think they have the skill players to compete. So up front, can they do that? That's the big question mark. I think they have some of the skill guys, and some that I'll mention right now. The first one is their quarterback, right? He was our Frank's Finest quarterback for Class A, I think deservingly. He's a young quarterback last year as a sophomore, going into his junior year. He's not a huge guy, right? He's at 5'11", but what I was impressed with is he made some good decisions in the red zone, and the ball can really fly out of his hand as well, especially in the middle of the field. He does a good job with timing, and so I'm excited to see his growth. His mobility has improved from what coaches told me. He had a lot of touchdowns last year. He's going to be huge for this team. If they're going to compete in this class, he's got to play at a high level. Let's talk about some of those old linemen. Beckett Bloomgarden, the senior, I saw him, 6'4" kid, 210, good build to him. He's going to be so important. Again, I talk about the trench warfare in Class A. If you're going to compete, you have to be able to win in that regard, and he's going to have to be huge for them. Another one is Chris Butler. Coach really liked both these players up front. They're going to have to lead this way up in the trenches for their unit. A couple other guys, Alex Edenbaum, the senior, shifty runner. He was another one that that coach really liked his work in the offseason. And again, I watched him on tape. He was a shifty guy. He's going to be important, again, with that. What they want is improved running game. Another guy who got, Kyle McKenney, the senior, he was someone who really did impress me as well. And he's an explosive football player. He plays running back and defensive back. I know he suffered an injury, but my hope is that he is full ready to go as well. And that he can make some plays for this team, because he's another explosive player. Again, skill-wise, I think really has some of those players there. Finally, Jamison Blakesley, was another guy that I liked on tape. He's a junior. He was a big play wide receiver for them last year. I do think really has the skill guys, right? To me, can they compete in the trenches? Can they compete with a running game? Those are going to be huge factors if they're going to succeed this year. Let's go to the next team. The next team is Harrison. Harrison, coached by Jay Sirocco, last year had a fantastic year. I don't think people had enough respect for Harrison last year, and even including this year. Last year they go 8-2. They had a huge win versus Rye. They also had a huge win versus Mayapack in the playoffs, and they lost to Somers in the semis. Last 5 years, they've really kind of turn things around. I feel like there's been some more consistency here. Harrison is a very well-known program with a lot of winning in its history. They're 24-19 the last 5 years. They haven't had 4 straight winning seasons since 2010 to 2014. So a little interesting tidbit there. They've had now 3 straight. Now there's an opportunity to get that 4 straight winning season for the first time in, 9 years, right? So interesting development, and I'm going to be, if I'm a betting man, and I'm going to put a bold prediction, I think they do get that again this year. And they're bringing back some talented guys. Offensive-wise, the skill position, 5 out of 11 starters coming back. 1 starter on the offensive line, although 1 player did get some quality reps. They do bring back their quarterback. Defensively, I do think is where their biggest boost is coming, which are 6 out of 11 starters. So they're bringing back some experience. Now, the big question to me is depth. I think their first starters can really, compete with anybody, but depth is a huge concern. I think, 27 kids on the varsity. Injuries happen in football, and they can really derail a season. They're going to have to find some guys who can give you quality depth, and these starters are going to have to play everything, right? Offense, defense, special teams. Your best players have to really carry the load here. Because I mentioned, you look at programs like Somers and Clarkstown South, they got 60 kids on their roster, right? So it's a huge discrepancy in the amount of kids on there, but could be quality over quantity here. Offensive line and defensive line wise is also another thing I think Harrison really needs to shore up. I keep talking about trench warfare, and for me, Harrison was very competitive last year, had some big boys up front. Can they do that again this time around? That's going to be huge for them, because I do think they have some really talented skill guys. Couple players, here is quite a few. Chris McLaughlin is the first one, the wide receiver quarterback, one of the most dynamic players in this section. Not a very big guy, but someone that everyone has to target when you're playing Harrison as a defensive coordinator, and he made a lot of INTs as well. So he's a guy who takes chances and usually succeeds at them. Up front is also what I mentioned is so huge for this team. Gianluca Santarelli, the senior, really love his motor. He's very disruptive on the defensive line, and one of the veterans on that offensive line coming back, one of the only ones coming back. He's going to be so important for them up front. Again, not a huge guy, but he's going to win with effort. He's going to win with technique. He's going to have to be huge. One of their bigger guys is Arden Bali-Damaj, defensive lineman, defensive tackle, and offensive guard. This is a young player, junior, 6'4", 235 pounds. He really showed raw potential on tape. They want to see that big jump from him. He could be really big and provide a huge boost up front if he could take that next step. Running back and linebacker Christian Barcella, he was a Frank's finest, the senior. I love the way he runs. He's not a big guy, but he runs with that low center of gravity, runs through contact, and shows some shiftiness to him. Again, Harrison is going to be relying on these skill guys to make big plays for them. He's one of them. You got Marco Citro, their quarterback. And this is another guy at times on tape is really, really impressive. He's a guy who can throw the ball, a guy who can run with some power. I thought he had a really strong game in the playoffs versus Mayapack. This is a guy I think he's going to have to take that next step and be kind of the orchestrator to this offense with a bunch of skill guys. So he's going to have such an important year on him on his shoulders, but I do think he has the talent to do that. Running back and defensive back Joe Krupe, another young guy. He's a junior, was on a sophomore last year. There's another athletic guy as a defensive back and as a running back who can probably fill in some role to make some plays. It's kind of like those scat backs when they run kind of like those wing T and option plays, and then when they go into spread me into that slot, right? So he's someone to keep an eye on. Dante Lanza is another one at the halfback and safety spot. He's a junior as well. They're going to need some juniors to really step up this year if they want to compete. Another guy kind of in that fullback defensive line, Damian Nicolaj. He's also a junior at 6'1", 200 pounds. Marco Marisi is a sophomore that coach he highlighted as someone to keep out an eye for. And I mentioned on that offensive line, Drew Haynes. This is another, the offensive line is going to be so important if Harrison wants to compete. These are some of the players to look out for. Let's go to the next team, Eastchester, coached by Fred DiCarlo. last year. Had a strong year. They went 6-3. They did miss the playoffs, though. They had that heartbreaking loss versus Cross River, which really put them in a bind last year. End up missing. But listen, 6-3 was their most wins since 2015-2016, right? In the last 5 years, 22-20. They had a really strong year last year. I love the way they played defensively. On the offensive side of the ball, they're returning 5 of their 11 starters, 3 out of 5 on the offensive line. They do have to replace their quarterback, which they're having position change for Aiden Schultz, who was a fantastic wide receiver, is now moving over to the quarterback spot to fill that void. Defensively, returning 7 of 11 starters, so you're bringing back a lot of veteran experience on this defense on a unit that was pretty darn strong, so they got to be happy with that. Big question mark for this team on the offensive side of the ball. They really want to start faster. And obviously the big question is kind of that quarterback wide receiver, right? You had to take a wide receiver who was really good for that unit, move it to the quarterback, and although Aiden Schultz is very athletic, it's still an unknown commodity, right? So you're not really sure what you're going to get there, and because you took a wide receiver out, you also, bring some uncertainty in the wide receiver room. So you got a mixture of those two things. But I tell you what, with the experience of this defense and the offensive line returning 3 out of 5 starters, I think Eastchester is another team, both on this kind of, B League out of Class A, that could make some noise. I really do think that if the quarterback wide receiver that gets established, I do think this is a team that can make some noise this year. The quarterback spot, I mentioned Aiden Schultz, the senior. This young man transitioning, could have been a Frank's finest wide receiver, right? So he's going to be huge, dual threat. He's going to have to use his legs, his arm. He really is going to have to, make big plays for this team. Linebacker and running back Vince Chiafone, the junior, he was a big-time playmaker at the linebacker position for them last year. He was a Frank's finest linebacker. He's somebody who really has a good nose for the football. I talked about him on a previous video. Another guy, Sean Mannion, on the defensive line and offensive line. Going to be such an important two-way player. Good-sized kid to him. Very explosive on the defensive line. And you can see, I watched their media day. This is someone who looks like he's really bulked up, and coach has been really impressed with his work. He's huge. Matt Porcello on the offensive line, 6'1", 235-pound kid, solid-sized kid. He's going to be big. And Chris Losatos, I apologize for that. But I tell you what, I watched his tape. There's another guy on the defensive side of the ball on the defensive line that was also pretty disruptive, and he's a two-way lineman. He's going to have to be huge again. You mentioned those 3 returning offensive linemen, going to be massive in a Class A that's about physicality, being able to move people. So if Eastchester wants to be competitive, those are the guys that are really going to have to step up. And there are some couple skill guys that did coach liked their work as well. Kieran McCluskey, the senior, they think he could be probably their reliable wide receiver, number 1 target. And Nick Martucci, the young player, running back, wide receiver, outside linebacker, young football player. Coach was really excited about the work he put in as well. All right, let's go to our final 2 teams. And next up is Clarkstown North. This is by Coach Joe Trongone, who's been there, feels like forever. Last year was a struggle. When you look at it, they went 2-8, no playoffs. The year prior, they went to the playoffs. So it was a struggle last year. They're also replacing a lot of football players. So offensively, 2 out of 11 starters are coming back. On that offensive line, only 1 out of 5. At the quarterback spot, they also have to replace that as well. Defensively, 3 out of 11 starters are coming back. But I know this. I thought they had a very strong JV program coming up, and you need a lot of guys that are going to step up, try to turn this thing around after a struggle last year. The big question mark, when Coach mentioned only returning 1 out of 5 starters on the offensive line, it's that offensive line. It's shoring that up. You have to replace 4 starters. Who's going to step up and make plays for them? I think the young man they're bringing back has also been pretty darn good. We'll talk about him. But my take overall is there's a lot of inexperience here. There's a lot of inexperience, a lot of unknown quantities. You want to see if some of these young guys can really step up, and some of the guys who are juniors who become seniors, how big of a jump can they make, right? Some of those players, to me, it starts with one of the more sure entities, and that's Patrick Banky, the junior. This young man at 6'2", 200 pounds, I thought he was really solid for a young offensive lineman. I think he has pretty large potential. He was a Frank's finest offensive lineman for good reason. I really liked his ability to move and finish blocks. You also have that the quarterback spot. Coach kind of talked about a couple quarterbacks battling it out. Theo Ryan, the senior, and Jack Kavanaugh was a very good athlete. They both probably Who knows how that ends up being? They both could be getting reps. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm excited to see kind of the quarterback dynamic and who executes their offense to the best of the capabilities. Another guy to keep in mind, a junior, Jaden Biggio. Coach brought him up. They really like the work that he put in. Tight end and linebacker Connor Nolan was another young man that he mentioned as well. And to me, look at a guy like Aiden Pompey, who I watched also get some reps last year. He's a wide receiver, running back, and defensive back. As one of those juniors becoming a seniors, they're really going to need to step up and take a larger role. Colin McGovern, a really solid kicker, also plays running back and outside linebacker. They really like his leg. And again, you talk about special teamers who can change the dynamic of a game here. Ryan Colopy, the junior, and Jason Espinal, the junior. So they have some young guys. He also mentioned at the end there with Ryan and Jason that like the work that they put in this offseason and is going to have to be big for them this upcoming year. Let's go to the final team, and that's Pelham. And coached by Coach Artie Vigiano. And again, he's another coach that I like talking to, has a lot of energy. And last year they went 6-3. They lost to Rye in the quarterfinals. And this is a program that when I spoke to Coach a couple years ago when I first started, a big word that he uses is respect. And he wanted to get this program to a point where they are well respected in A, and I think he's done that. The last 5 years, they're 23-16. They have really become a team that you need to recognize and respect in this class. And that's what they're playing. They're winning on the football field. There'll be no easy out, because that's kind of what he wanted, and I think he's achieved that. But they do have to replace a lot of guys. And you look at this year, offensively, 2 out of 11 starters, none on the offensive line coming back, and they have to replace their quarterback, right? So, you got 2 quarterbacks battling it out in Anthony Orlando and Eddie Maher. Defensively, they do bring back 3 out of 11, but Coach really emphasized they need to be nasty. You lose a lot on the defensive line. You lose secondary. He does think the linebacking core will be strong this year, but a lot of inexperience. Young guys have to step up, and Coach mentioned that it's their time, right? You got to be able to take that mantle. Now, some of the players to watch. First one to me is one of their returning guys. I think one of the better guys. He was a Frank's finest. Nick Massarelli. He's wide receiver, running back, defensive back, kind of just an athlete for them. He's one of the, not a big guy, but one of the fastest guys and shiftiest guys in the class. And he's a big play threat. Even as a returner, he's someone to definitely keep an eye on. Connor Bryan is someone that Coach brought up as that returning linebacker, and also on that offensive line is going to be big. He thinks he can help lead a linebacking core that he feels is strong to make a lot of plays for them on the defensive side of the ball. Isaiah Graves is another one at the running back and linebacker spot, getting some of those linebacker reps. And again, this linebacker group he feels like could be tough, it could be fast and physical, and he's going to be one of them. And I'm looking at the quarterbacks. I mentioned Anthony Orlando, Eddie Maher. They had to replace a quarterback who was very athletic last year. How do these 2 guys, how are they going to handle this, taking on that role and making plays for their team? So for me, Pelham, I can never rule out Pelham. I think they're a group now that has contributed. They've had a strong JV as well. These are guys that just come out each and every year, and they're going to be a tough out. But again, that's all the teams, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know usually I do some bold predictions at the end. I might do that on social media, but I don't want this video to go too long. So appreciate everyone tuning in. And with that, Frank signing out. Peace.